Okay. Another thing we want to talk about is you have to start somewhere. Like most people will probably just start with the circular apple, and then you build your scale out from there because you got to start with one object in order to have scale for all the other objects. You got to start with something, right? If you'll notice that the bottom of the apple and the bottom of this pear, or I guess you could kind of say the front leading edge of it, is not really the same. Okay? So one is slightly forward than the other. And that's important because knowing where the bottoms of things are also tells you not just where the bottom of it is, but where does that pear's bottom cross the apple? Okay? Or conversely, you can say, where does the top of the apple pass through the pear? For height comparison. See? So you can use your pencil as a quite handy little device for measuring, not just for drawing. But the thing is, this is what we call the picture plane. So when something is closer to you in the picture plane, it generally tends to be a bit lower in the picture plane. If something is further away from you, it tends to be a little higher in the picture plane. So now we have enough room today with our 18 by 24 pads. I would like you to try to draw about the same size as the objects are in reality, if you can. So I'm going to just start with the apple here. And anytime I do a sketch, I just want to do a nice light sketch like this. I don't want to do anything, remember, I don't want to do these real dark lines. It's a little harder to change your mind with. So another thing is I have to imagine that there's going to be a banana in here. Sometimes when I sketch, I just want to know what are all the little elements in the scene. So I've got an apple, I've got a pear over there, and I don't even have to draw it at all. I'm just making little like scribble notes, and then I have a banana here. And what that does is it just kind of quickly sort of tells me, where is this thing sitting inside my picture plane. All right, but once I kind of start now with the apple, like that's about where I'll say the bottom of that apple is. Now for me, it's going to look a little different for me than it's going to look for you depending on where you're sitting, okay? Those of you over there, you're going to see them spaced apart. Those of us over here, we'll see them maybe stacked a little bit, and that's fine. So I'm going to just sort of look like where, with this apple, where is the pear's bottom? Which I'm thinking is kind of somewhere for me, maybe in here somewhere. Okay? That's the first thing that I like to try to establish. And then from there, now I could just make my best guess, do a best guess drawing. So I'll just kind of go, okay, I'll just kind of wing it with the pear and sort of just estimate where I think the rest of the pear is, and including the stem. Just, a quick note there. Now you see how I'm drawing through? Remember we talked about that, where you treat every object as though it's transparent at first? So you can just draw your whole shape and then get rid of that part. What that does is it really helps you confirm where does it go in and where does it come out the other side. Because you've got the whole shape, so you can really verify, where it's going in one end and coming out the other. So just go ahead and draw it lightly and then just simply, erase the part you wouldn't need. Okay? So now some of the pears have a little bit of a lean-to them. So sometimes what I do is I like to put like a line kind of down the middle of a pear just to kind of represent, if it's kind of tipping a little bit to one side. So I guess you could call this like a central axis line. So I get the vibe that it's kind of leaning a little bit. So I'll do something like that, okay? Okay, so that kind of gets me where both objects just are in space related to each other. Okay, then I'm going to come and put the banana back in again here. Okay, so now I have to figure out, you know, where the banana is. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of using my pencil and I'm kind of looking at what is the angle from, say, like the tip of the banana to, say, like the top of the pear. And again, if you close one eye and you just hold your pencil out and then just kind of lean them against that, it forms an angle. So I'm getting that angle and I'm kind of bringing it up to my drawing. Or I can just, you know, sort of look at it and say, okay, the banana, the tip of the banana is somewhere over here, and then it curves, obviously. And then the other tip of the banana is somewhere in here. So I have point A and point B. So now what I have to do is I have to kind of take into consideration, does the banana touch the apple? Which it doesn't in this case. I can actually see a little bit of air. You may not be able to. It may look like it's overlapping to you, but I can see a little air between the two of them. So taking some of these factors into consideration, that there's a little gap in here, I'm going to try to do my best to see if I can get the shape of the banana to fit into the space I've allotted for it. Now this is going to be a little bit of a challenge because we have if you're the one drawing the banana sort of coming at you, we're dealing with a little bit of what we call foreshortening. That's just a fancy term for organic objects in perspective. So we talked about linear perspective and we talked about circular perspective, but when an organic object kind of comes at you or goes away from you, it has a sense of perspective too. So, and this can really kind of throw people a little bit. So the banana has a kind of like an instep here, you know, it curves, and so getting this kind of curvature of the banana is important. So I'm looking at, you know, what is this curve, and then it has the stem part that sticks out here, okay? And then I'm looking to see, did I also satisfy, I've got a little bit of a space between the banana and the pear, and I've got a little gap between the banana and the apple. So I'm satisfying this thing, you know, this basic angle here, okay? And then I can come back and say there's a kind of a, you know, a height differential between the, see, this is the envelope I was talking about, in a sense, okay? So it's like a box that they sort of exist inside of. If that's confusing to you, as far as there's more than one way to skin a cat in a sense on these things. So you can use negative space, you can use angles, you can ask yourself, where does one thing pass through another thing? You know, there's hopefully I try to give you 3 or 4 different things you can try to use. Sometimes you wind up using all of them. So what we have now is a sort of a basic map of our still life. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clean it up a little bit. I'm going to take out some of the excess sketchy lines that maybe I feel I don't need quite as much anymore. The shapes are all just still kind of simple shapes. I haven't really refined the shapes yet, but they're kind of there, but they could be improved. So I just take my kneaded eraser and I kind of try to clean it up so I can see what I've got a little better. You can also, at the same time, kind of make a note about your shadows, your cast shadows. So there's a little cast shadow for the pear. Then we have our nice elliptical shadow, very much like the ball we did last week of the apple. So there's my kind of elliptical cast shadow from the apple. Then I've got a cast shadow coming from the banana here, and then there's one that kind of runs here, and then a little bit one for the stem here. So I can make a little bit of a note Now don't draw these lines real thick and black, okay? You're just making a very light note about where the various parts are, okay? Now another reason is, say once I sketch this in, like what if my pear was like up here or something, or my banana was like down here? I'd be like, oh darn, you know. At that point, you know, maybe bump it up a few inches or bring it down. Not that that's like super critical for today. I'd rather that you concentrate a little bit more on the arrangement and worry less about whether it sits nice and perfectly within the borders of your paper. Okay, but you know, if you can develop some good habits kind of early on, so what we're doing is we're just kind of asking ourselves, you know, what kind of air do we have around the piece? Now, paper is a little bit more forgiving than like canvas would be. So say like I decided I don't need like several inches over here and I don't need several inches over here. You know, you could physically cut that off later on and kind of frame it down to what you think is ideal later. So, okay. I just don't like my objects in the drawing to kind of, unless I'm purposely having something run off the picture plane, which is totally possible. I sort of like to have like a sort of no-fly zone, you know, around the piece, just to give it some comfortable air. The problem is when you box a drawing in a little bit too much, it feels claustrophobic a little bit. Conversely, when you give, like, you know, if I did my little arrangement over here and like 75% of the paper were blank, it would feel a little bit like, okay, that's not really using the space very wisely. So anyway, it's really analogous to when you take photos with your phone. You know, you're thinking a little bit about the empty air left over. Okay, so phase 2 now is, now this is where you can go in possibly 2 different directions. You can start laying in tone and really get to it really fast. Or you can do what you call like a contour drawing. That's just a fancy term for, we kind of grip our pencils in a more classic manner, and we go in and we kind of slow down and we try to draw more of the specific shapes of things. Then we put the tone on. So really, this is a sort of optional thing. You can kind of go, one option is to just start laying in some tone and rubbing it around with your towel, or we can do the contour drawing. All right, let's do the contour one, which is just, now you just kind of slow down, and maybe you'll make a little bit of a darker mark now. But now you're just kind of trying to be a little more observant about the shapes of the objects, you know, to try to be a little more accurate to their outer shape a bit more. And it's not like it may be radically different than your sketch, but you're just kind of cleaning it up a little bit, giving it a little bit more, you know, definition than was there before, okay? And remember, apples are not going to be perfectly round with a line coming up out of them. They have a sort of a wonky, everything in nature has a little bit of a sort of wiggle wobble to it. All right? Or you could say a geometry. Some people like the geometric approach, which is where they kind of do like a squarish apple, and then they kind of round it out. That's one other approach. You see people really, really dig this sort of geometric approach, as though the apple were carved out of like a block of wood or something. Okay, so I'm just now trying to be a little more observant about, you know, the shape of the apple. And again, the apple isn't just a perfectly round sphere. It's going to have a little bit of, again, a little bit of geometry to it. And then not all stems are going to be these, you know, these big cherry stems that stick up. This apple has a little crater. So I'm kind of doing like, this represents kind of a crater. Although I'll tell you what, I always see this with that. That's the universal symbol for crater with stem. That I see almost every person do it this way. I mean, that's okay as just a sort of a note, but it's not what you want to have as your finish. Really, and I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, I've noticed this trend, I've seen this so many times. What you're really doing is you're kind of representing the sort of, you do have a crater. It's a little sunken area in here that is like an indentation in the apple. So what I'm doing is sort of indicating the forward edge of it, and then I'm looking at my little stem, which barely pokes its little head. It doesn't have a very big stem. Now your apple may, so not all is going to be the same. So that's, to me, a little more of a fair representation. So don't always resort to like cartoon solutions to everything. Try to act like, and I know this is really impossible, like you've never seen an apple before, right, which is kind of silly, I know, but okay. Then now it's interesting about bananas. Bananas have, all objects have what you call planes to them. And what a plane is an area that receives light or is in shadow. So bananas have these, you see this little line that runs along here? Bananas have planes to them. So this is one plane, the top plane, then it falls off to the side plane. But bananas, whether you may not have even really noticed it before, but they have a really interesting series of little lines that indicate where the planes are on the bananas. So they have like, here's a top plane, and then it falls off to the side plane, and we even have another plane over here that's in shadow. So you see it's a little brighter yellow on top, and then there's a little bit of a shadow here on the side. So you can represent that a little bit by maybe just a little mock shading to drive the point home. But this is what we have of a banana. They're very kind of planar, sort of geometric objects. Although again, see, you've had bananas, I'm sure, hundreds of times, but maybe you've never really looked at one. That's the cool thing about drawing, is it forces you to look at familiar objects in a way that you may not have really thought about them before, because you just peel a banana and you eat it and you don't even think about it, right? But bananas have a very kind of planar, sort of way about them, where they have, like I said, top plane, side plane. Circular objects do too. Their edges are smooth, so you don't really notice them as much. But think about it. This apple, this would be sort of the top plane of the apple. Then you have like the side plane. Okay, so you can divide objects into different planes, but rounded objects, because they don't have like a definite, like, it's not like a stairs where it falls off very dramatically. It just sort of smoothly transitions from the top to the side. A human face is like that too. Our front plane of our face, and then the side plane of our face, but it's all sort of melded together, They even make special planar busts of the human head that are squared off geometrically, so that artists can study. When you light them dramatically, you have a very distinct plane on the forehead, and then it changes to the temple or the nose. It's a human face, but it's all been like cut very dramatically. So artists can really drive the point home with a sledgehammer that, right? But other still life objects do too. It's just, maybe it just takes being kind of aware of it. So anyway, I'm just trying to key you into some of that. I know there's lots of things to sort of juggle when we're doing this, so here's some more stuff. Okay, so that would kind of be just my kind of general sort of map. And you see when objects are foreshortened, like if you draw a banana in what you call a profile, which is the easiest angle. So a profile is like if I hold my arm out like this, and I told you to draw it like this. It's not too bad. You can kind of see the whole shape. There's nothing foreshortened at all. So this is pretty easy. But if I say draw it like this, then you're like,
And
can I be excused? Why is that? Because what happens is it goes from a very sort of everything is sort of its own proper length. It's very, all you really have to do is kind of, you still have to, you know, some challenges, but, you know, it's okay. But when you turn an object and sort of have it be kind of coming at you or going away from you, it suddenly becomes an extra little visual challenge. So if you have a banana like this, that's kind of the easiest way to draw it, you know, is just kind of like this. But if you turn it like this, or say you're looking at it like that, where one end is maybe coming at you and the other end is sort of going away from you, it becomes like a truncated banana. So it's like a squashed banana. So it looks weird, you know, you're like, so if you look at a banana like that, it doesn't quite maybe have the same register to you as, you know, the familiar sort of shape. So that's what I'm sort of trying to get here. Okay. Okay, now we can finally go into the shading part, the tonal part, which is where it starts to pick up pace. So what we've done is just made like a fairly clean contour map of what we've got. So now let's just take our, I forgot to mention I am still just using the ebony pencil. So I would again suggest maybe like a 2B, 4B, 6B as your kind of combo pencils, or 4B, 6B, whatever, should be good. So now what I'm going to do is start laying on some tone. So you can ask yourself, now if you want to take a picture with your phone and sort of set it to black and white, maybe that might help you to see how these colors translate into shades of gray. You know, how does kind of an olivey green, or how does red, kind of reddish orange, how does yellow, you know, how does it translate into shades of gray? It's not always easy to know the exact level of gray of something. You can kind of ask yourself what part of the object is sort of dark, what part of the object is you know, what's the lightest object, what's the darkest object. You know, you can kind of do light, medium, dark. But I think you just have to just start. No object, sometimes all objects are going to have a little mix of some light, medium, and dark within the same object, unfortunately. But just at the beginning, you can kind of just with some parallel strokes, just like we did last week, where we wanted to get the shading in quickly. So I'll just put a little bit of stain on the object, come over here to the apple. Now the top of the apple maybe seems a little lighter to me, but I'll still just put a little bit of shading. Don't worry that this isn't like perfect yet. This is, plus when we rub this with a towel, you're going to see how much this changes. Do you remember last week when we rubbed that thing with a towel? It really got quite different quite fast, didn't it? So actually I would not go and color these things in super dark at the beginning, because they're going to get darker when you rub them with your towel. Now if you want, go ahead and put your cast shadows. If you want to make a little bit of a note about your cast shadow, see, I can just kind of get that sort of established. Now for me, do you see how it has a pretty dramatic inner shadow, like a two-tone shadow? So there's kind of your outside gray shadow, and then your second inner shadow that's a little darker, isn't it? And then now yellow, we don't want to just leave yellow just the white of the paper. I mean, yellow, that's why putting it on a piece of white board, you can see that the object is not the same white. So, but we don't want to turn a banana into a plantain, like a lemon into a lime. So we just want to put a very soft layer, maybe a little bit more for the little green bits. Okay, then we can just quickly sketch our cast shadow in. See that? You see how we have a lot of information very quickly. See? So we get a lot of what we want to know very fast. Now, here's where, again, it picks up pace. You put your finger inside the towel, And now, okay, we're going to really start getting this to be defined a lot better. See how dark it kind of turned as soon as I started rubbing it with the towel? Okay. Now, if you push, as you push with your finger, just physically push with your finger against the paper, it's going to get a little darker the more you push harder with your finger. Okay? Now, if you put a tone down and you think, oh my gosh, that's like way too dark, of course you can go back and take some of it back out again with your kneaded eraser. You know, you're not stuck. So, you know, if you put a little bit of tone down and you think maybe you went a little too crazy with it, or as you're rubbing it with your towel, it just got way darker than you expected, you know, you can take that back out. Now it doesn't, you know, still doesn't look like, you know, finished illustration, but essentially we have kind of all the essential information present. Now we just have to kind of do, you know, where we kind of make things look pretty now, you know, which is the detail phase, which now that you have what you call the macro phase done, you can then just kind of roll up your sleeves and just take as long as you want on the detail part. The detail part's a little harder to teach because that is sort of the accumulation of the nuancy stuff that you do in all the other drawings you've done. You sort of build up a little bit of a repertoire of how to do some of that stuff. So all I can tell you is I grip my pencil again in the more sort of classic way, and now I'm just trying to kind of go in and darken up or just, you know, shore up the details a bit more. I'll put the highlights in. We haven't really, we're not dealing with highlights. Don't worry about highlights at this point. Highlights are kind of like the little trim you do at the end, the little special thing you kind of do to sort of dot your I at the end. Now with this particular pear here, I can see a little bit of darkening, you know, on one side of it. So I'm making some notes as I'm sketching here about, you know, where some of the darker bits are. So what I'm doing is I'm taking this sort of gray area and I'm trying to inject some variety into it. Okay? I'm also going to bring out my stump. My stump. Always sounds like a pirate or something. I'm going to draw with me stump. But I'll use the stumps. I could still use my finger inside the towel, which would still be okay. It's just when we get a little bit smaller now, we're bringing the scale of the blending down. It's nice to have those stumps, which have a little point on the end of them, to kind of get in there a little tighter and do what our finger does on a bigger scale, but do it on a smaller scale. So here's my stump. Okay, my paper stump. So I'm going to come in now, and this just does for me, again, what my finger kind of did on a bigger scale, but I can control it better because it has a point on the end. You could also use your tortillions, if you remember, those are your single point stumps as well. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter which one you use. It's just a tightly rolled piece of newsprint kind of paper that helps to blend. So you see how I'm kind of just refining it a bit more, making it a little more dramatic, right? So now I'm going to put some highlights in. Now I don't know if you can see this or not. One thing I could do before I put the highlights in, can you see that the pear has little brown speckles, freckles on it? So you can just kind of do the same thing. Now you don't have to copy. Please don't feel like you have to copy each little dot. That's ridiculous. You're just saying, okay, it's got some little brown spots just sort of peppered, you know, throughout the pear. Okay, so just, you know, kind of use it as inspiration. We don't have to copy this kind of stuff, like literally dot for dot. That's kind of silly. But you know, you just kind of do some little speckle spots. Just give it a little sense of some texture. This just adds what you call visual interest to an object. So it isn't just a dull, empty nothing. It's got a little bit of texture notes on it to kind of engage the viewer's eye a little bit. Okay, so we have some speckle freckles. And then we're going to do our highlights. Now, if you happen to have one of these little mechanical erasers, you could use that. If you don't, we can just use our kneaded eraser. And a lot of times you can shape your kneaded eraser to fit the, whatever you need. So I'm looking at the little highlights on there, and now I'm gonna sort of come in and see if I can kind of pull some of the little shiny bits. I think this is most people like highlights. It's kind of the fun little dressing at the end that you do. If I did them early, like right away, like real early, like say I just went ahead and put the highlight on, it's fine to indicate it, there's no harm done. It's just by the time I'm done, it'll get washed away and ruined anyway, right? So you might as well just sort of save it to the very end as your kind of little, final little detail that you do. You just kind of pop it on at the end, okay? And you can also knock highlights down maybe just a skosh with your finger if they're looking, again, a little bit too much like you took a white paint pen and put it on there, okay? So you can just kind of, knock it down a little bit. So that gives it a sense of having a little bit of like a glow, a shape to it. Okay, so I can kind of move on to the next object then. Well, I haven't really done my cast shadow. I put my contact shadow. We talked about that, with that little dark line last time of the contact shadow. So I'll just kind of quickly pop my shadow in for the pair, and then I'll move on. Let's move on. Try not to eat up too much time here. But you see how really going from, you can see the difference now. This almost looks like a kind of a ball of gas to this looks more solid now, doesn't it? So that's really what we're doing is we're kind of taking our sort of ghostly, underdrawing that we have. Painters call it an underpainting, but that's what painters do. They put a rough version of the finish underneath, and then they paint the finished painting on top of it, right? So that's really what you can kind of consider this to be. So now I'm going to come in, and so what I want to do is not only just darken, but just also just improve the shapes of things. I want to sort of slow down and look at any kind of subtleties of light and shadow. And I know this may seem a little advanced,